Let's go ahead and get the meeting started. If you would, we've got a meeting at 6 that has to start on time because we have a liquor license. I'm going to shoot for 6:10, see if we can meet that, 5:50, excuse me, so we can give a 10-minute break for the next meeting. So kind of keep that in mind as we kind of go through. First one up is Larry Lang. He's going to talk about some of our city investment policy. And before you start, Larry, do you want to ask questions as he's going through, or do you want to wait to the end, Council? What do you want?
Maybe as we go through.
Should go through?
So we can remember what we need to ask.
Okay. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, and I think that, that works very well for both of us.
Okay.
I'm going to start out with a little history of this, and then I'll introduce our advisors.
I think yours is dead there,
Hey, sure.
Larry.
Yeah.
Or else it's not on.
It's not on.
You got it on? There you go.
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to start out with some background, and then I'll introduce our investment advisor, and we'll move through. We've got a lot of new faces in the City Council since we adopted our investment policy in 2010. Prior to 2010, the city's investments were primarily kept in cash and then invested through the state treasurer's office in what is called the Local Government Investment Pool, or LGIP. The LGIP, the state treasurer, does a great job in managing the LGIP, but their average maturity for their investments is only 29 days, and that very much limits the yields that they can get on their investments. So in September of 2010, the City Council adopted its first investment policy. February of 2011, we contracted with PFM Asset Management to serve as our investment advisor and manager so that we can have a managed investment program. Currently, as we work with PFM, we meet quarterly with them on our investments, and then one of the things that the City Council asked for when we adopted this was quarterly reports. If you recall, the first year or so we did those with presentations to the City Council, but there were concerns over the snoring in the audience, and the City Council was the only one that was truly interested, and so we gave you hard copy reports for the past year or so on a quarterly basis. Total funds that the city had as of June 30th, 2013 was approximately $84 million. Of that, 41%, or about $38 million, was in the general fund, 27% was in the enterprise funds, and the development impact fees had 20%. The other fund categories tended to be considerably lower in those balances. And how was that invested as of June 30th? About $6.4 million of that $83.6 million was in cash, and that's needed to meet our payroll, cash flow, and so forth. That's not unusual. Those accounts are swept at night, but at today's interest rates for overnight rates, that's pretty insignificant in the revenue that it generates. About $27 million is still in the LGIP, which the return for last year was about 20 basis points, or 0.2%. In fiscal year 13 on the LGIP, we earned $59,000. And then the remaining portion is in our managed accounts, and those are the ones that we can better manage the time frame on, and that's the funds that we're talking about in the investment policy. And the return on that was about 33 basis points for the past year, and it generated about $250,000 in interest income over that period of time. Under our current policy, we're basically limited, and this was a choice we made. We've narrowed our investment policy from what state statute allowed, but as we were getting into managing our investments, we wanted to be very conservative at the start and see how it was working. And so we're allowed to invest in certificates of deposit, banks, savings and loans, but all of that has to, of course, be subject to the FDIC limits, repurchase agreements, the LGIP, U.S. Treasuries and agencies, which is where the bulk of our investments are in the managed investments, and then various state agencies. As of June 30th of 2012, we looked at several cities around. We left Phoenix off this list just because the percentages would change dramatically with their large numbers. But how other cities had their funds invested as of June 30th, 2012. You'll see that about 15% of the invested funds were in the LGIP, 9% were in money markets, 67% was in U.S. government securities, local bonds, very rare, 0.2%, and then commercial paper, 7.9%. You see up there that 5 cities are the ones that are doing commercial paper. When we discussed the investment policy in 2010, those same percentages at the bottom, LGIP at the time was 34%. Money markets, banks, and so forth were at 9%. That one hasn't changed a whole lot. U.S. government securities were at 54%. Local bonds were nominal then too, but commercial paper was only 2% at that time. So our peers, at that time only 3 communities allowed commercial paper in their investment policies. Now you can see 5 of our comparison communities do allow that.
Larry,
Yes,
just
sir.
quick, commercial paper example, is that holding corporate bonds? Is that what that is?
That would be corporate bonds of various maturities, and Lauren will be going a little bit more in depth on that, but it's corporate bonds. It is, they have to meet certain rating categories, and of course they have to meet the investments. But that's exactly what I mean by that. Okay. Thank you.
Larry, is the U.S. Government securities, are those bonds?
Yes, U.S. government treasury bonds,
That's
treasury
paying
bills.
nothing.
Oh, the one that's paying nothing is basically a checking account.
Okay.
And it gets swept out at night into investments, but
No, I understand.
yeah.
But it's basically, that's what it is.
It's basically a checking account. We used to earn a little bit on it that would offset some expenses. Not anymore.
No, ours doesn't either, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually about 6 months ago, as we were having our quarterly meetings, we talked to our investment advisors, who I am going to introduce, trust me on this, and they get the rest of the discussion. But we talked to them about expanding our investment policy to include corporates. And from a staff perspective, I'm recommending we go that route, keeping in mind that we still believe that our safety, and it's in our investment policy, doesn't change. Safety is your top priority, followed by liquidity, followed by yield. And with that, what I would like to do is to introduce 2 people that are here this evening from PFM Asset Management. They have been working with us since we started. The young lady to my left is Lauren Brandt. Lauren is the managing director from PFM, and actually I got interested in developing these managed investments here from a program Lauren put on at the Arizona Finance Officers back in 2009, and I said, you know, I think that's where we need to start going. And so Lauren has a background. She joined PFM. It says here in 1995. I'll let her debate that if she, I don't think she's quite that old, but she was a prodigy, we will assume. Also with us this evening is Paulina Wu. Paulina, if you'd just stand up so that people can see you. Thank you. Paulina is, she kind of handles the day-to-day contacts with us a lot. She's a senior management consultant with a very good background. Both Paulina and Lauren actually attend quarterly investment committee meetings that we have here. And, you know, last week, I don't know if any of you caught this in the news. If you did, I'm quite impressed. But last week, the Federal Reserve met, and part of what they came out was that they were going to stay with QE3.
Oh, I read that.
Well, the day that they came out, I got this from PFM Asset Management, which is talking about, okay, what's going on? How will this impact your portfolio? Very quick. It's that type of thing that we get from our investment advisors that is very helpful for our program. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over for a few minutes to Lauren to ask her to review some of the background that you might have or need to make a decision like this. Lauren?
I'll check to see if mine's working. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah. Good evening. Thank you for letting me join you this evening. As Larry mentioned, in discussions at our quarterly meetings, we've talked about perhaps the expansion of the city's investment policy to include corporate bonds as a way to further enhance the city's portfolio earnings. I just wanted to give you a 2-second version of PFM Asset Management. As Larry mentioned, we were selected through a procurement process, and actually we are a firm that only works with public agencies around the country. And we manage currently about $47 billion of public sector assets, and in Arizona that about $2 billion of public sector assets. So what I'm trying to say here is that our investment philosophy and objectives mirror yours. We always have at the forefront of any investment decision safety. Safety is paramount, followed of course then by liquidity, making sure you have the funds that you need for your day-to-day operations. And then last but certainly not least is to make sure that you have, that you're generating sufficient earnings and the most optimal earnings you can given cash flow constraints and other considerations. So here's the team that we have. Larry introduced myself and Paulina, and not here is the portfolio manager. We put him behind the desk 8 hours, 9 hours a day to watch those little blips on the screen looking for looking for trading opportunities for the city. As Larry mentioned, what I want to do very briefly is review the managed portfolio program of the city and talk about and provide an update on the status of the corporate sector and to discuss that recommendation of adding the high quality corporate fixed income securities to the city's investment policy and portfolio. So taking the liquid part of the portfolio or investment program out of consideration, so this pie chart and bar chart does not include the bank balances or the LGIP balances. This is just the core managed funds, as we call them, about $50 million. And the credit quality is AA+. Larry mentioned, but I'll just reiterate, that it's comprised of U.S. Treasury and federal agency bonds, about 71% Treasuries and 29% in federal agencies. And you can see the maturity distribution of the assets as well. So primarily in that 6 months to 3 year maturity range. And just to give you an overview of the current procedures, we work very closely with the city, and no investment transaction is made without the city staff approval. And so we will always make a recommendation and present that in written form to provide any of the benefits to the portfolio and any additional considerations. And then we await a response from the city staff prior to making that execution. We always buy with the intent to hold a security to maturity, but as in real life, when you buy a home and you buy it at the best mortgage rate you can, there might be an opportunity to refinance and gain some cost savings to you or additional earnings for your own pocket. We look for those types of opportunities as well with the city's portfolio, and those are the types of ideas that we present to Larry and his staff. And then once those trades are approved, we take on all the administrative responsibilities in terms of executing the trade and the trade settlement. So taking on that burden so the city doesn't have to to do that. Some of the, just very brief, some examples of these types of transactions that we've done on the city's behalf. These are looking at selling some existing securities in the portfolio prior to their stated maturity date and buying, moving from a Treasury to a federal agency or from a federal agency to a Treasury. And what you see on the second to right-hand column, that market yield, that's the investment that we're selling. So, for example, on May 14th, we sold an investment at just 0.13% and then bought a security at 0.41%, garnering additional earnings for the city. And that realized GL at the end is just the gain that we made on the sale of those investments, which is additional earnings also to the city's pocket. And so again, what you see here are Treasuries and federal agencies. And one of the things that Larry mentioned is staff is proposing to make the change to the investment policy to expand your list of permitted investments in line with the Arizona revised statutes to include commercial paper and corporate obligations, negotiable certificates of deposit, which are debt of banks, and then also money market fund instruments as well. Now, I'm sure, we all lived through the Great Recession here recently, so why would you want to add corporates to the portfolio? Well, corporates can actually do quite a number of things in addition to enhancing your earnings. And one of those things is to provide additional diversification. You may have heard, but it's coming down the pike, is that federal agencies, like Fannie Mae, Federal National Mortgage Association, and Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, Freddie Mac, are actually being wound down. So they're actually, they're 80% originators of mortgages in the country, but they're being mandated to wind down their portfolios, which means they're not going to be issuing a whole lot of debt in the future. So we're looking for high quality alternative ways and areas that we can expand our clients' investments into. And this gives us more access to the fixed income market. So at the same time, I don't want to give you all the benefits without letting you know the risks as well. There are risks to corporate securities. These are unsecured debts of these, debt of these corporations. So you need specialized tools, research, and ongoing monitoring in order to ensure that these are safe, continue to be safe investments. And we'll talk about very briefly the ways that PFM monitors these investments on a daily basis, not just at the time of purchase. These are just a lot of charts, and essentially what they're saying is talking about the corporate sector and how they, corporations have improved since the, even prior to the beginning of the Great Recession and the financial crisis. Ones I'll point out on the upper left-hand side, Standard & Poor's sales and earnings growth by sector. So we've seen, and y'all are watching the S&P 500, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You see those numbers continue to climb, and that's a result of corporations continue to have enhanced earnings. And so those corporations are providing, in addition to that, they have more capitalization, especially banks, than prior to the fiscal crisis. And that's due to regulatory requirements, but also because they just have more cash on hand. And so we've seen that the corporate environment continues to improve. Here's, in terms of the benefit to the city, here is a look at current yields for U.S. Treasuries, federal agencies, and corporate bonds in various maturities. And as you can see, the benefit to the city can be upwards of 0.25% or 0.25%, even up to 0.5% depending on the maturity. So that's significant additional earnings to the city. And then if we look back and take a look back and say that the city's managed portfolio of treasuries and agencies, if we just added 20% corporates for that same time frame over the last 2 years, it would have resulted in an additional $245,000 of earnings, just as a comparison. And as you recall, what as Larry had said, this would effectively double the amount of earnings that the city would have received over the time period. But like I said, there's benefit, but not without risk. And the risk, but there's ways to manage that risk. And one of the ways, of course, is by establishing internal percentage limits by issuer. So we recommend, and Larry is recommending, no greater than 5% per issuer. Also, in terms of the sector, the Arizona revised statutes actually allows you to invest 100% in corporates, but collectively we think a prudent number is 30%, no greater than 30% in corporates. And also ratings. You want to make sure A or better in terms of credit ratings. And when I talk about credit ratings, that leads into PFM's credit process. We actually look at credit ratings as only one component of the viability of an issuer, because we think that just because an issuer may be legal, it's not necessarily appropriate for a public sector portfolio. And the way we kind of look at that is not only in terms of a credit rating, but we look at, is it a leader in its industry? We look at its corporate governance practices. We look at trends in the industry. Also, what is their pattern of ratings, not just at this time, but what has been the trend of the rating over historical periods? What are some red flags? Well, if they're in front of the SEC all the time, if there's changes in regulatory requirements, or if there's a pending merger, these are the things that we really delve into before we ever put them on our approved issuer list. So that's our credit philosophy. I won't go into detail, but that's how we look at each issuer on our approved list. So there may be, actually there's roughly 600 issuers that would qualify as A or better in the universe of corporate securities. Our approved issuer list only includes 50. So again, that goes to the legal but may not necessarily be appropriate category. And here's a look at PFM's credit committee. It's not just one person making this decision. It's multiple persons, including our chief investment officer and other very experienced folks. And I wanted to show and share with you a representative list of our approved issuers. You can see these are highly visible names, and some of these are global companies, but all domiciled in the U.S., and they have very varying revenue streams. So they're very diverse companies. Berkshire Hathaway, you might wonder why Apple is even issuing debt, given how much money they have, but they're taking advantage of the low rates right now. And so they, too, are accessing the low rate environment, and they made an issuance about 2 or 3 months ago. This is just to say some of our history in PFM. We did not have a client that had a security that defaulted or went bankrupt during the credit crisis. We were out of Lehman, Washington Mutual, all of those investments prior to the fiscal crisis. And that way our clients could sleep at night, as could we. And that's just been a proven part of our process over the years. And again, it's not just looking at the time of purchase, but also on the ongoing basis, on a daily basis, actually. So those are some of the reasons and some of the rationale behind why we're also supportive of the addition of corporate notes to the city's investment policy and portfolio. But again, you know, the benefit is not without some risk. We think there's effective ways to manage that risk given some of the things that we talked about. And then Larry?
Okay. We included in the packet attached to the COAC this evening, we included a proposed revised investment policy that would meet the recommendations that Lauren talked about and that I talked about earlier. If the City Council is comfortable with that and wants to move that direction, we would bring that back to you for formal action. The City Council is the one that adopts the investment policy, not staff. If you're not, obviously we'd like to hear any feedback that you have or areas of concern. I did want to mention one thing that we didn't identify in there, and it's on page 7 of the investment policy. There's a little table on page 7 of the investment policy under the category minimum acceptable credit quality. And that table in there created some minimum standards that we put in, and we did plagiarize that from other cities when we went through and put it in. Most of those cities have already pulled those out. There's one technical issue. We are a AA-, for example, and in one category, the long-term rating under S&P or Moody's would have to be 1 grade higher than the City of Goodyear. That's AAA, because a grade is how many A's there are. There aren't that many AAA in there. So we're recommending that that box be removed from it. It creates confusion the way it's in the investment policy. But in the copy we sent you, we did not show that as being deleted.
So you wanted to take the long-term rating out of both S&P and Moody's? Both
We
boxes?
would take that whole box out.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yep. Questions, comments?
Any questions? Go ahead, Joey.
Just so I probably asked this back in 2010, but I need to understand this one part. I know that when we have investments and they are on daily, every other day type of, you know, transactions, but when we were looking at 1 to 2 years, is this for the funds that are our savings or contingency? Is that lump of money that we're discussing? I mean, when you have 50 million, I'm sitting there going, how do we have 50 million that we're investing? So explain that part to me just a
Sure,
little bit.
be happy to, and that's a very good question. You're absolutely correct that it includes, for example, the rainy day fund, the contingency fund, that's a part of it. We also have certain other reserve monies that over time they build up, or that we have, that they aren't always spent immediately. Examples of that include we've got about $4.5 million of various reserves that in the general fund for vehicle replacement, that shows in the general fund for insurance, those types of things. These are transactions that we see the cash flow coming, but not necessarily immediately. The other thing, as you look in those investments, and you saw on that screen, I believe it was an average maturity of 1.74. That's average of the entire portfolio. And so we have some that are shorter and some that are longer. We may have some out there as far as 3 years. We have some that might be 6 months from now. So we're always able, if we see a cash flow issue coming, we would be able to reduce it without being forced to sell at a loss. That's also why we put the remaining money in the LGIP, just to keep that. Even though the return is lower, we want to maintain our liquidity. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Any others?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
If I might ask Lauren, please, Larry, what other cities in Arizona does PFM
Work with?
work with? I'm just curious.
Certainly. The cities of Chandler, Scottsdale, the town of Gilbert, city of Mesa, the city of Surprise, the city of Tucson,
Oh, that's great.
city of, I'm missing some, sorry, city of Maricopa, quite a few others.
Okay, very good. I like what you said tonight, and I appreciate you doing it in language that we could understand it, and I appreciate you doing this presentation because this is the first time I think I've seen the presentation since I've been on council, and this is my 3rd year. But I just wanted to know if you were involved with other investment proceedings with other cities, and knowing that, and I like the list you said. They're very conservative cities as we are, and I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I want to thank Larry and thank you for coming. And I think this is a good idea, and it looks like you've done everything to minimize the risk and basically maximize what we can return in for the city. So thank you.
Others? Go ahead, Bill.
I'd like to echo that, Larry, what Sherry had to say. It's, as we've been changing our approach to the way we do business as a city, this just becomes the next logical step that we get a little bit more, I'm going to use the word aggressive. I know you guys didn't, but that we get a little bit more aggressive in how we're, investing our huge pots of cash that we've got to manage. So thanks for continuing to be progressive. I appreciate that.
Shirley? You good? Just one follow-up. That one, I guess, schedule you showed, the commercial paper was about 7.9%. Are we looking at something comparable in our entire portfolio as far as diversification?
Yeah, first, if I could, that 7.9% was of the total, which included the LGIP in that.
Right.
What we're looking at, what we have talked is that we probably would never get above 20, even though the policy's at 30. 20 would put us, if we were at that level in today's, that would be 1/8, that's about 7%, yeah. So we would actually be right in that range of our entire portfolio when you include the cash and LGIP.
My only concern is I appreciate you may never get above 20, but I would love us to stay within the range here of the others. I'd like it to stay there within that 20,
But
just
this-
so that it
yeah.
equals the 7.9 in the big picture, that's all.
And I think it would at what we've been talking about.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Are we going to give them direction that we would want them to invest in corporate paper? Is
Do I
that
get
what
any,
you're
we
looking
can't
for?
get any nods here as far as on the council?
Is that what you want from us,
We
Larry?
want some direction.
Tonight, is just your comments. We will, based on what I'm seeing this evening, we will bring this back to you for action to adopt a revised investment policy. It will likely be a consent calendar item because we've had this discussion this evening. But obviously, if the City Council wants a presentation, I'm not as eloquent as Lauren, but I can at least give a little if that's what you'd like.
I think you've gotten direction here, Larry. You're good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulina.
We've got item 2 tonight, review of proposed text amendments to various sections of the zoning ordinance pertaining to breweries, brew pubs, and microbreweries. Steve, Planner 3, will present. Hey, Steve. They sent us a new one. Did you see it on the text? Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, council members. This is a proposed text amendment that we would like to introduce you to, get any comments and feedback.
Do you mind getting closer to the mic? Because I'm having difficulty hearing you because you speak so softly. Or pull the mic up closer, maybe.
He carries a big stick, though.
Okay.
The zoning ordinance does regulate land uses within the city, and if we are proposing a change to a regulation to a land use, a text amendment would be the route that we would go. Some background, we do have an existing definition for bar microbrewery that was developed in 2004 in response to the city's desire to regulate those establishments that served alcohol and provided entertainment. The intent of the text amendment is to potentially look to lessen some of the constraints that are subject to the microbrewery development, while also not making sure that they do not impact the surrounding area. As you can see in the existing definition, the beer product is for on-premise consumption only, and the maximum of 25% of the floor area may be devoted to the brewery. What we found is that many breweries are looking to brew the beer and also offer it for off-premise consumption for distribution. It's a significant investment in equipment, and they would like to fully utilize that. The state does regulate microbreweries. They would be required to get a domestic microbrewery Series 3 liquor license. That allows them to produce up to 40,000 barrels of beer annually. Does allow on and off-premise consumption, and if they did stack the license with a restaurant, Series 12, or a bar, Series 6, they would be able to sell other alcoholic beverages. Microbrewery would be subject to the 300-foot separation requirement from churches and schools. These are the 3 new classifications we're proposing: a brewery, brew pub, and microbrewery. Brewery, that's going to focus more on production. The brew pub is basically a restaurant with a microbrewery component. The microbrewery, that'll be a little bit of both. They will focus on production, but they will also likely have a restaurant portion. Brewery, that will be the most intense. We're proposing that in the I-2, general industrial. Brew pub will allow that in the C2. Microbrewery, the C2, and the I-1. There will be provisions we're proposing for that they can get special use approval from the council for a brewery if they were looking to exceed 40,000 barrels. Microbrewery if they were going to exceed 15,000 barrels. And for a brew pub or microbrewery.
Hold on, Steve. Question, Sherry?
Now, to put 40,000 barrels, is that normally what a restaurant brewery? I mean, can't put that in context. Would that be standard? That seems like it would be since it's under state law, but I don't know.
How many bottles of beer is that?
How many bottles of beer on a wall?
Only more than 100.
Vice Mayor, Council, members, 40,000 barrels is a lot of beer. Some of our most successful craft brewers, like Four Peaks, they've reached that, then they've started other licenses. Most do not get that high. That is quite a bit.
It doesn't bother me. I just can't put that in context. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Can you go back one slide, please? So a brewery, having grown up in the suburbs of Chicago, I know exactly what a brewery is from Milwaukee. A brew pub is a restaurant brewery. A microbrewery, which will brew the beer for on-site consumption and wholesale and retail with food, sounds like a brew pub-ish. If you go to the next slide, do we really want a food and beer consumption place in industrial? What's the rationale behind? I mean, to me, it sounds like a restaurant with a little bit more robust brewing capability.
Mayor, council members, that's a good question. What we were looking at with the microbrewery is it potentially does not have to have the restaurant component, and it is geared to a higher production up to the 15,000. They may like to locate within a facility, flex industrial or such, that gives them more capability to do what they need to do, whether it's building or location. So that was the intent there. Some do want to have that food component. That's why we did allow the C2 as well.
But they can, if I want to open a microbrewery and I want to brew 14,999 gallons and allow people to test it, consume it, the whole thing, I can do that in an industrial area.
Yes, sir. That's what we were proposing within I-1.
So kind of off on the beaten path, tucked away somewhere, because we, our industrial areas, I'm concerned that we're actually encouraging the consumption of alcohol in industrial areas by allowing this, as opposed to looking at it from the production. If you cannot consume at a brewery, is that correct? You can only brew.
Mayor, council members, in the brewery, they would have a capability for a tasting room.
Right, but it's not for consumption.
Yes.
Where at the microbrewery, it is for consumption. So theoretically, we're looking at a place to go consume alcohol in an industrial, if I can just really simplify it. And I don't know if anyone else shares that concern, but that kind of bothers me a little bit. We're going to have these little party areas tucked away. I love the idea of a microbrewery. I'm just not sure that it belongs in an industrial area.
Could we talk to Sherry on this, please? I'd like to hear what economic development has to say, because we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot here. But I do share your concern, Bill. But I have been in industrial areas in Washington where there have been some wonderful brew pubs, and workers weren't coming out and drinking, but we were going in it on the evening, after a football game or something, and they're just wonderful places to go.
But there's a difference also between the light industrial and I-2. So there's truly a difference.
Let's hear from Sherry. Let's see what she says.
Vice Mayor, council members. So your concern is a good conversation to have. If you would, for example, think of the area here at Estrella and Van Buren on the southwest corner, for example, that is a light industrial center to a large extent. So you might have your oil change there. You might go to yoga class. You might also have your car worked on. You might have several things going on, activities going on. You might go to CrossFit there, for example. And that area tends to be a bit of a mixed use. That is a typical light industrial center. And so the advantage to a business in that instance is delivery and storage of the beer making parts, so if you will, the grains and so forth. It can often involve a silo or two, quite often more deliveries than our typical delivery hours would allow in a commercial center. And access for brewing activities after hours that we typically wouldn't allow in a commercial center as well. So that's why there's an advantage from a business perspective. From a patronage perspective, the microbrewery might, for example, want to have kind of that industrial feel, that open garage door look, things of that nature that we, again, may not be compatible in a typical commercial center that will have some design standards that are very core to more of, say, a shoe store or, a grocery or something of that nature. So that is the trade-off in allowing it to go into an industrial area.
Okay, and at the end of the day, it's still a special use permit. Is that what I heard?
No, it's allowed by right.
No,
if we
so it will
yeah.
just be flat
unless
allowed.
we go above the top of the production annually
Yeah,
in
okay.
each category. That's
All right.
correct.
Well, thanks for the further explanation.
Could I ask one more question? Do we have a brewery that is looking at us, and this is why we need to address this?
Vice Mayor, council member, yes, we do actively
great.
have a brewery that's looking at us, and the potential applicant is in the audience this evening.
Wonderful.
And is very actively pursuing purchase of a site in Goodyear that would fit this criteria, and has worked with the neighborhood and the HOA in the center that he's looking at purchasing, and has dealt with the state licensing requirement, and is very encouraged to begin business here should we have an opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a follow-up? No? Anything else? Thank you, Sherry. Go ahead.
So with the text amendment, the brewery classification, we can look at that one first. These are the additional regulations that they would need to comply with. And as we see with the brewery, it is capped at the 40,000 barrels. It does allow for the tasting room, does not permit live music or entertainment. This is more for the production. The last provision is something required by the state with the license. They do have to report back. What we would like them to do is just provide us a copy of that documentation as well.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I hate to be so nitpicky, but this is important. Why are we saying no live music and entertainment? What if they want to have an open house? What if they want to bring a country western band in to open a new beer called Kick Your Boots Up or something?
Goodyear beer.
Goodyear beer, thank you.
But this is
I mean, well, even a brewery. I went to Coors Brewery, and they had a 3-string orchestra playing for us right there while we were going into Coors. So, why would we put that in there?
Vice Mayor, council member, there is a provision by special use permit to allow for live music in that
Oh,
instance.
good. Okay.
And so
So we're not
thought of
saying
that
no. They
potential
just have
provision.
to ask us again.
That's correct.
Oh, that's
For
good.
special events, et cetera.
So,
Thank you.
okay, so to clarify, it is going to stay this way. However, if there was a need for some special event for this, okay, thank you.
Would they have to pay for it?
Probably, yeah.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I'm kind of with Wally on this one. I don't see why we really need that in there. It seems like we have a history of kind of shooting ourselves in the foot with the entertainment industry. Is why we don't have as much entertainment here as we could. So I don't see, because they're going to have tasting rooms. Yeah, they said they're going to have tasting rooms. You can go in there and taste.
Yeah.
Like kind of.
This is a tasting room
Yeah.
to sample beer and.
So,
Yeah.
just seems.
This is the brewery, this is the big guy. Yeah, I'm not as concerned about it.
Vice Mayor, council members, the other issue that you may want to take into consideration is that will be in a industrial area, and so live music may not be a compatible use, during normal business hours. It may be something that you wish to have discretion.
And it's my understanding the use permit would take care of that under, for maybe a grand opening as opposed to, it would not be a place that would have it regularly. It would be to promote something more than likely.
Vice Mayor, correct. And it will allow us then to designate hours and security plan and control for alcohol control, et cetera. So I think that's...
Do you need to modify that live music and entertainment are not permitted except with a use permit?
We
I mean,
will
if
add
you
that
put
provision,
that
correct.
provision in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's not permitted.
Yeah, it doesn't say it.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, Steve.
Next category is the brew pub. The 40% gross revenue must come from the sale of food. That comes from the restaurant classification described by the state. That's where we derive that number from. And again, the live music and entertainment provision. The microbrewery, again, the cap of 15,000 barrels. The documentation that we would ask them to provide us at the end of the year, and again, the live music and entertainment issue.
I have one question, and this is just, it may never occur, it's out of the box thinking, but, you know, I know that there are places around that are, you have rock and roll on one side, and you have country on the other, and you have them, it could be the brewery in the center, and you have two different acts going on. I would hate to see that. That's obviously a large facility. Back to shooting ourselves in the foot, I would hate for that to be a factor because those places exist and a lot of people like them. And I got 20-year-olds in town that are bored. So let me tell you, I would hate to see 20. Thank you. Thank you. That was really bad. That didn't sound good at all. Yes. Thank you, Sherry. 21 year and above. But I would hate to see us stop a facility like that because those are places that can be a lot of fun.
And if I can piggyback on that,
Same with the brewery.
when I hear the live music and entertainment shall be limited, I'm thinking they may be having like the football game, the Cardinals game over here, and the band over there. I think that limits it. That's how I read it, you know. And I would hate for further on down the line someone to really strictly enforce that.
Is there a way you can put language in there to kind of give yourself some options there?
There is. We can make that a softer, just one, for example.
Does that make sense to the rest of everybody?
Yeah, could we do it for both the brewery and the microbrewery?
If that's council's
I
direction,
mean,
we
'cause,
certainly can.
they're going to try to offer the public anything they can to bring us in. And the more live entertainment, especially in Goodyear, for goodness sakes, we need all we can get. So I really
good.
don't
We'll
want them to having to keep coming back to the city for a permit or to ask or, we want to help them.
Okay, I would like to say though that I'm with staff on the brewery, not the brewery pub, not the brewery in the industrial 2 section.
The brew pub is what I meant to say.
Okay, your brew pub. Thank you for clarifying
I'm
that.
sorry.
Okay.
Microbrewery and it's a brew pub.
So in the brew pub,
Yeah.
in summary, brew pub, you'll have a little more generic, so give you some options because I've seen the places that Joanne's talking about where they have multiple, events going on, country.
Have you seen the places?
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. I'm over 20. I'm over 21. And if you can do that, that would be fantastic. And then make sure you don't cut yourself on the other piece,
Right.
on the big one, to make sure they can't have.
We will, and Vice Mayor and council members, just so you are aware, there is a provision in our code today for a use permit to allow live entertainment in venues such as that or restaurants, but we'll clean up both languages so that they're compatible with your direction.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
On a completely related but subject, is there anything else near close to this that we can fix while we're in here monkeying with the language and the zoning that we can take care of all in one fell swoop? So you don't have to keep coming back to us every time someone has a great idea to bring an awesome business into the city. Then we got to go get council to change that. Is there?
Vice Mayor, council members, so it has been the direction of leadership to bring design guidelines or revisions and some revisions to the sign ordinance that have expired since our last conversation. And I have a draft on my desk to bring to you, and you should be seeing that in the next couple of weeks. It is our intent to bring those to you for discussion and direction prior to the retreat in November. So those will no doubt result in some changes to the zoning ordinance and the design guidelines. that I think will address many of the things that you may be concerned with.
But is there anything close to this brewery, microbrewery issue that we can kind of wrap into this?
If there is council direction to choose a specific issue to move forward faster, that's certainly the case. But
I don't know what I don't know.
right,
Is there an entertainment factor that we can? I don't know. I'm just trying to help you guys be efficient, and I think I've heard a number of times from people saying there isn't anything for people to do in our city, and I know that that's what I'm hearing from folks that I talk to. So this is a place to go. This is something to do in the city. So if there's some other language we can wrap up to do it, I'd personally like to see us get a bigger bite out of the apple if it's within staff's time and whatnot to
we
do
will
that.
definitely take a look at that and bring that forward should we find something that is contributing to the lack of interest, shall we say.
We're getting close to the 10 of 6. We're going to see if Steve can finish up to see if we can get any other kind of closing comments or questions so that we can give a break before we start the regular meeting. Go ahead, Steve.
Vice Mayor, council members, this is just a quick summary. Again, just going over what we've kind of already talked about.
Okay.
I did contact and send information on this proposal to the Arizona Craft Brewers Guild. I did talk with them. They did not have concerns in the sense that our intent was to lessen regulation on the microbrewery industry, so they did not have any concerns. We did go to the Planning and Zoning Commission in August, did not have any opposition to that meeting. This text amendments are public hearings, so we do advertise and need to go through the public process, and that's what we're doing. And to date, no opposition voiced to this amendment.
Any other questions? Have you gotten enough direction, you think, from us?
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we have a council members report on current events and manager summary. Can we hold off on that everybody hold off on that till we have the meeting? Okay, with that, we'll adjourn this meeting. We'll start the council meeting at 6.